Perfect. So today, just the panel discussion we're going to have today is to really just tackle issues around climate change, around ecological and societal changes that we are experiencing. And we've divided it in a way that we're going to first sort of look at sustainability, environment, circular economy, and critical minerals. And then we're going to look at social responsibilities, and then we will move into public perception, and then we'll conclude with training and mentoring and career advice. But before we delve into the discussion, I would like to ask our panelists, I'm going to give you each 60 seconds to tell a story about yourself, 60 seconds. And I'd like to start with Dr. Lingli.
Okay, thanks, Halleluya, and thanks for the SEG chapter, really amazing initiatives. So I am Lingli, I'm a research fellow at the moment working with iCRAG and UCD University College Dublin. My research mostly focusing on understanding the formation process of critical mineral resources through Earth's evolution, and my research has been covering carbonatite rare earths and orogenic gold, and also sedimentary system, porphyry systems. So I really look forward actually to chat all these varieties of resources with everybody and how it can sustain the supply of the society.
Brilliant, brilliant. Manuel, over to you.
Thank you, Halleluya. My name is Manuel, and I'm a PhD candidate at Kyushu University. My research is focused mostly in orogenic gold, for the inclusion of the chemistry of these gold type deposits. And I've been also working with some professors that are focused on resources and social sciences. And that's all probably for me.
Perfect, perfect. Rose, over to you. 60 seconds.
Thanks, Halleluya. So yeah, I'm Rose. I'm a PhD student at the University of Leicester, studying alkalic type epithermal mineralisation of tellurium and gold in Fiji. But I also do a lot of outreach aimed at encouraging underrepresented groups to study geology. And last year, I co-founded Responsible Raw Materials, which is a not-for-profit aimed at improving sustainability in the raw materials sector.
Brilliant to see young people involved in a lot of this sustainable development link stuff. Over to you, John. John Barry, over to you.
Yes, well, thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations on putting this wonderful symposium together on Earth Day. I've spent the last 30 years in exploration around the world, exploration geologist. I'm a SEG fellow, but today my hat that I'm wearing is spokesperson for the Institute of Geologists of Ireland. We've recently published fact sheets on the industry, mining and our green future, and also the value of mineral exploration. And we see this as important because right now we have groups that are trying to put forward, obviously, the idea of a green energy future, sustainable future, but in many cases are opposed to mining. And it's how we join these things up in the future, which is going to become very important, and it must be fact-based and science-based. And that's why we've come out with these fact sheets. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, thanks for accepting our invitation, John. And it's good to know that we do have some experience in the room. So we are looking forward to sort of drinking from your cup of your experience. Josephine, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. Halleluya. My name is Josephine Uushona. I'm a senior geoscientist at the Ministry of Mines and Energy under the Geological Survey of Namibia. I'm actively involved in science outreach programs. We try to raise awareness on the importance of science, specifically earth sciences. I'm the General Secretary for YES Network and a country representative of the YES Network National Chapter.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Just for the audience, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we move along with our panel discussion. So this is really just to start the conversation because currently all the talks are around sustainable development. So my question to the panelists is, what does sustainable development means to you? And what do you think are the key fundamentals in achieving this? And I'd like to start with John.
Okay, well, it's kind of interesting. A mine is not sustainable because it depletes its resource from day one. So for our industry to find these critical metals that we're going to need going forward. I mean, you know, we just look at the amount of copper that's going to be required in EV metals. There was talks on lithium and the impact on the environment and so on. We're going to have to find small planets of metals, and that means exploration. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be a young economic geologist. I think it's this huge transformation that's occurring in our society. Sustainability, look, mining is invasive. It is an invasive industry, and we need to use all the technology and the knowledge that we have. The world has changed hugely in the last 15 years in terms of regulation and compliance and that. And we need to just mitigate that impact. We need to reduce it as much as possible. But ultimately, sustainability of our mining is going to revolve around exploration, discovery, and then the recovery of these metals, which is also a huge part of it. Our mineral processing, how we get better at doing that. Often mining critical rare metals, which are in very small quantities in rocks. We have to mine large tonnages of these rocks. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's a balancing of cost benefit going forward. That's all I would really say at this point. It's a huge subject, right?
Brilliant for that answer, John. And you mentioned critical metals or critical minerals, and this is where I would like to bring in Lingli and Rose, because they're also interested in critical metals. And Lingli, you are busy working on one of these research that involves critical metal. Can you please sort of just take us through what this has to do with sustainable development and how you think it's going to be achieved? And then Rose can come through as well.
Yes, I think it's a very good continuation with what John just mentioned in terms of sustainable development. As probably many of us are aware of that, it includes three parts: the social impact and the environmental impact, and also the economic impact. That's the classical three aspects. But I think nowadays it comes to more and more discussion, or more the fourth dimension. It is the security of the critical raw materials. And that is really my past 6 years postdoc research focusing on how to sustainable to secure these critical metals, and in terms of recycling as well for the mine tailings. That comes to a lot of the topic nowadays, circular economies. And I think from this part, I can really nicely pass it to Rose.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in terms of critical metals, you know, by definition, we don't have security of supply of them, and we do need them in terms of going through the green transition. But I think it's also really important when considering sustainable development to remember that whilst this is quite a trendy topic, you know, because people are very happy to talk about renewable energy, we don't have houses or roads or glasses to drink water from without mining either. And, you know, mining is essential to any of the sustainable development goals, whilst being an unsustainable industry, because by definition, you know, you're taking something that you can't put back. And research into how to do this properly or effectively environmentally is really important, because at the minute there isn't enough metal in circulation to rely entirely on recycling or entirely on a circular economy. And, you know, this is something that I think this is where the public perspective thing comes in, because so many people don't realise that the volume that we need, we can't just rely on recycling.
Brilliant, great talks there. But before I get to Josephine and Manuel, I would like to sort of post a question to Lingli, Rose, John, and Josephine and Manuel, feel free to jump in. But this is coming from more the academic stuff. So it says, academic fundamentals and applied research is essential for sustainable development. And we know that, especially in mining and finding new mineral deposits. A major proportion of this research work is carried out by postgraduate students and early career individuals. So do you think this is sufficiently valued and recognized by the industry or by the society or even by academia itself? If not, how do we think we can improve this aspect? Anyone feel free to jump in.
Well, I would like to. Josephine?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that the work that geoscientists they do, somehow it's not valued, especially for those non-expert people. And that's understandable because of the language that we use in most of our works. It's not compatible with the background, educational background of other people outside geoscientist family. And that's also linked with what I think it is the president-elected of SEG said, like the way we communicate, it's really important so that our work can be valued. And that brings me to the final question, which is how can this be changed? Then I think we have to make sure to bring down our narrative to those who are not geoscientists. That way, we may make sure our work can be valued for those who are not geologists, especially social and then politicians. I would say that. Thank you.
Brilliant, Manuel. Josephine, you wanted to add to that, please. You are next.
Yeah, I think, John here, I think that the last year of COVID around the world has shown how the general public can suddenly get very, very interested in science. And we're surrounded by people having views of these things. So I think we need to reach out and engage and educate. And it's not just about the what and the where, it's also about why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, someone called it the revenge of the geologists, that we're finally, we're going to come to the fore here. I mean, this is an incredibly exciting time that we need to connect up to save our planet, sustainability, and the decarbonization of the planet critically with these metals. And where do they come from? All the different things that we use, from our iPhones to our computers, but most importantly, our wind turbines, our solar panels, all these things. And we need to go out and engage, and we need to communicate clearly. And I think it will happen. But we've got to maybe come down from our ivory towers and get out there on the ground and engage. And each one of us is an ambassador for our science and for our careers.
Amazing. And we are all ambassadors for planet Earth, and we need to do our part. Josephine, what is your take on that question?
Yes, I think just like any other profession right now, they're thinking that we are not heard. They don't understand the importance of what we do, be it you are a lawyer or you are an earth scientist or any other profession. But it's up to us as geoscientists to educate and inform the public out there on the importance of our services or what we do. So people don't know because they are not exposed to it. They don't know the benefits of it. They would sit, they're in a home, but they don't know why the television is on and why they are using their phones. So I think it's up to us to create that platform to include the community and engage with them on the importance of what we do, the work that we do, but on a very basic and understandable, relatable platform in an environment that they can understand.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I would like to bring in Rose in this discussion because of what you have co-founded, the non-profitable organization aimed to raise awareness on sustainable development. So we know that a lot of mining companies, and I'm sure you probably do have a lot of links to mining companies or mining communities. So many companies have declared a commitment to carbon neutrality by certain dates in the future, right? So do you think, how can we determine whether this is real intention and whether this is just a greenwashing? And how do we who is held accountable for these things that are being put in place?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I would suggest that unless you are embedding carbon neutrality properly into ESG, it is by definition greenwashing, because you can power your mine with a solar panel, but if you've pulled all those elements out of the ground in an area which is, you know, suffering drought, and you have really abused the local communities, then you are not a sustainable mining company, irrespective of how you are powering your mine, or whether you are carbon neutral or not. That said, carbon neutrality is obviously, you know, a great target and a great aim if it is done properly. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try and be carbon neutral at all. We absolutely should. It just needs to be done properly. And I think a lot of mining companies and investors are starting to realise this now. So whilst there is frameworks like TCFD that focus on carbon, you're starting to see a lot more frameworks coming in that consider things like biodiversity more, and other bits as well. And in terms of holding them accountable, you know, there are international bodies, there are people like, you know, the mining codes and standards and things like this are slowly coming into the mining codes. And there's frameworks, you know, that people have to sign up to, whether they be, you know, mining specific or more general, like the Equator Principles. But on a very fundamental level, I think the general public are having more say in this now, because in terms of, like, when you look at the DRC and Cobalt, you know, Apple and Tesla and companies like that had a massive issue on their hands when the public started to see or images started coming out of what was happening there. And I think consumers will soon have more power to decide, you know, where their money goes.
Brilliant, Rose, for that overview opinion on the question. Lingli, you are working currently on critical, sort of trying circular economy or critical circular economy aspect. What sort of steps do we have to take to make sure that we work together to mitigate negative environmental impacts of our work? And I'm sure this links into what you're trying to do with your current projects.
Yes, I think it's in terms of minimize the negative impact of the exploration work from the mining activity, particularly. What we researchers can do in contributing to the sustainable goal. I think one of our previous talks from Houghton, from the China University of Geosciences, he gave quite a good example to use some mineral geochemistry as an indicator or vector of the how the fertilities, and if it expand that picture, you can actually use mineral geochemistries as well to compare some fertile rocks which contain those mineralization, to compare it with those rocks that doesn't have those mineralization. And by bringing a statistic approach, you will be able to actually have a quite good understandings where to target for. And that is really low cost and very low footprint as well. So that's what I see what researchers can contribute and the key steps can take to contribute to the sustainable goal in the future, but definitely in collaboration with or in cooperation with a lot of other techniques, expertise like statistics.
Thanks, Lingli, for that. And a lot of you mentioned engagement, communication, and public perception, right? How can we effectively promote sustainable engagement within communities? John, I think I would like to get from your experience of years you've worked in different parts of the world. So how can we effectively communicate and make sure people are at the same level as the geoscientists?
Right, so I mean, people call it the social license to operate. In the early part of my career, exploration companies went out, they made discoveries. They only engaged with the public at the time where they were looking to develop those projects. That just won't work anymore. It shouldn't work. The first representative of the company to go on a site is an exploration geologist, often quite young exploration geologists, and they're the first touch points with the community. The community needs to be brought in as a partner. Their trust needs to be built. Really, we use the term, you've got to build a project. You've got to build a project into the fabric of the local community. Because if you don't get that buy-in from your local community, you're not going to develop the project. So much earlier engagement, much more dialogue. And if you don't know something, you say you don't know something. You don't try and, excuse the word, bullshit. You say, we're doing the research, we're trying to find out the answers, and we will go on that journey with you. It's become a huge developing thing in the last 15 years, and it's improved a lot. The mining industry has improved a lot in that regard. There's still some huge issues. I mean, we saw what happened with Rio Tinto in Australia very recently, archaeological sites being dug up. So we do have some slippage. I would just say very quickly on Rose's point about ESG, we are now seeing that major funds, financial funds, are only going to invest in companies that are ESG compatible. So the investors are driving the funds to develop their investment policies. So we're seeing huge changes there as well. That's about it.
Brilliant. I like that you touched on trust, because 2 years ago, I was lucky enough to attend the Restore Summer School in Dublin. And one of the topics or the challenges that we're faced with actually involved around community engagement, ethical sourcing of raw materials, public perception, and circular economy. So through that, we sort of determined or came to a conclusion that engagement should be a process, a continuous process. And you need values to understand the sort of people you're dealing with. So it's just interesting to see that everyone understands that it's really key to make sure you value, you make people, you establish the trust which should not be broken, and you need to continuously engage from the beginning of the project, mid-project, until the end. Manuel, you were part of the Restore Summer School. What are your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, that's really good discussion, and thank you, John, for your contribution. Well, I think to get people engaged, we don't only have to communicate them about the benefit of the mining. We have, above all, we have to know the values of those people, what they value the most. Some of them, they have what some researchers, they call egoistic values, like they want to see their lifestyle level increasing or going up. So knowing their values, we can communicate them in the way that our communication, our narrative match their values. Our narrative match what they want, what they would like to see improving. I'll just bring a quick example from what happened in my country, in Mozambique. We have artisanal mining, which started sooner before large-scale mining came. And those communities, they live on the base of those artisanal mining activities. And sometimes what happens, like the large-scale company, they come and then they get license. I mean, they license from the government to explore in that area. And that in that way, the community should leave the area. And sometimes the community have their values, which are to see their life increasing. And if the company comes to explore that area and brings a narrative that goes to their value, not only just replace them to another place, maybe we can have engagement of these people. And engagement may mean, in this case, having these people in all processes, Halleluya said, and that would be very interesting, I think. Thank you.
Interesting. Yes, we have now established that, Josephine, I'll come back to you now. We've established that community engagement is critical, right? And we have different places. We have Africa, we have Europe, we have America, we have different continents. So I'd like to hear from the speakers different ways of communicating based on your experiences as to where you're based. Lingli have experience from Ireland, China, and everywhere else. Josephine, you have experiences in Africa. Rose, you have been in the UK, you have done your work in Fiji. And John, you have worked in Ireland, you've been in Africa. So I would like to sort of hear your experiences when it comes to communication in different places you've worked on. Josephine, up next. You are the first one on the line.
Okay. I just really wanted to add on what John and Manuel said. It's very important that communication Society starts at the very beginning of the exploration program. And not only we can communicate, but we need to know how to communicate with these people. So we need to know how to communicate effectively. We should study the environment. We should study most especially the cultural differences that we have of these people in certain areas. My experience in the African Namibian context is if there's a project an exploration project, communication directly to the community doesn't really work as effective. So you should study the environment. You should know, is there a chief? Is there someone who is in charge of this community? How do I approach this chief? How do I come to him? So you need to take into account traditional aspect of it, cultural aspect of it, and you go through it. So when you have that mutual respect, like John and yourself and Manuel said, and you really put in the effort on communicating through the different channels, then it's most likely that you are able to build that trust. You're able to build that relationship that will start on the onset of the exploration project till the ending of the exploration project.
All right, over to you, Lingli. What do you think? What are your opinions on this?
So my experience I just talk about my examples, my own experience actually engaged in China and in Ireland in terms of communicating with mining company as a researcher. So in China, it's some of the mines, we're talking about national culture difference, but I think within a nation, there is still culture difference from region to region. So for instance, if you go to some region of the mines, it's female sometimes are not very welcome. So at the beginning of the field trip, you really need to communicate well to make sure how to make the best arrangement. So that is my feeling of communication. But while in Ireland, my feeling is, especially in terms of big mining companies, they do have their own rules or doing things, arrange things. So first, of course, you have to respect these rules, and then see how the companies can accommodate your research demand and how you can cooperate to reach the maximum to bring benefits to both. Well, first, I think the communication is really what you want to achieve. You ask mining company what you want to achieve, what you want to understand, how we can help you. That's I think it's very important in terms of collaborations and communications.
Lovely. And I like that we are talking about collaboration, we're talking about engagement. Rose, you have done work in Fiji, and I believe you're based in the UK. How have your experiences been, and how is the public acceptance when it comes to the exploration and mining sector in general?
Yeah, I think to build on what everybody else has said, it's so example specific that it's hard to generalize and say one way of communication or outreach works, even on the country scale. You know, going out and doing field work in Fiji, over there, the mining industry and the local populations they work very well together. You know, there are villages that are only there because of a mine, and they have schools and they have, you know, churches and things that are important to them because of the mine, and it works really well. As a researcher going out there, you know, that there are some people who still aren't convinced that a woman down a mine isn't bad luck. And it's important to realise that things like this, you know, you have to respect that opinion, because you can't go in, because then you're just going to get nowhere. And you can't generalise. I think within the UK, you can't even generalise across, you know, different across areas. So I grew up in quite a rough area, and no one had any idea or understood why I was going and doing a PhD, even though I tried to explain the applications of it, because people just didn't understand it. You know, people in Fiji who you might think might be more averse to it or less understanding, actually far more and far better understand the benefits of mining. And I think there's sometimes a lot of arrogance that comes out of the UK or Europe in how we think we are perceived or our knowledge. And in terms of really educating people, I think geology really misses a trick, because it's such an applied science that we shouldn't just be talking to people when they're, adults. Geology is a great way of showcasing science to children on a very basic, fundamental level that I think we've just missed a complete trick.
I totally agree with you, Rose. We get to hear geology as you move to university. And I think there's really that gap. I think we need to work on a curriculum that involves us giving geology, because I believe the desire for someone to learn and appreciate something should be instilled at the very inception of their primary education. And I think that's really something that is lacking in a lot of our curriculum. John, with your vast experience, how has this been to you? And what do you think can be done for us to effectively engage and communicate and make sure that people value geosciences in general?
Yeah, I've worked on 5 continents. I would say that I'm not sure there's a fundamental difference, really. People are the same, I think, around the world, really. Yes, there are differences in protocols and culture and so on like that. But to my mind, it's like if you're coming into somebody's area and it's almost like coming into their home, and you need to introduce yourself, you need to build some sort of level of comfort and trust with these people, and be trustworthy. As Joyce was saying, meeting with chiefs in Ghana and drinking the schnapps and so on, and being in places like Vietnam, where not only were women a bit suspect in regard to mines, but actually just the authority of a woman in the early 90s in North Vietnam was they just wouldn't accept, the local geologists wouldn't accept to take instruction from a female geologist, an Irish female geologist at that time. So things have changed a lot. It's a soft skill. It's a really important skill. And, in terms of education, I've gone into schools to talk about geology, and the excitement is palpable with young people in there. And quite rightly, as Rose is saying, we have to keep on that road when they move into teenagers, younger teenagers and older teachers, to keep them engaged and to look at the curriculums in our school, educate our society, so that they understand the role we're playing. So I'm starting to ramble now, but look, I think fundamentally it's a human engagement situation where we have to build trust, we have to listen, and we have to, as Manuel was saying, we have to understand the needs of the local people. In Ireland, you go to speak to a farmer, you get permission to go and drill on his land. It's highly regulated. He wants to make sure you're not going to do any damage to his farm, where his livelihood has been, and all his generations before have existed on the land and so on. So you have to build that trust and be a straight talker.
I agree with you, John, and everyone else. I mean, I've been in exploration for a couple of years, and one of the things that I need to do for the companies I've worked for is community engagement, where you sort of need to go in and talk to people and tell them your intentions, right? And like everyone else said, you need to know the environment you're working on. Understanding what language they're able to understand, I think, is really key, because I'm from Namibia. I don't speak Afrikaans, but a lot of the areas that I worked on, a lot of farmers spoke Afrikaans, and that was already a challenge. So I think knowing who you're dealing with is really key. And this brings me to the question to sort of say, what do you think are the non-technical or social skills and knowledge that we need to make sure we strive in making sure that we communicate well to local communities and other stakeholders? And I would like to start with Josephine. What are your thoughts on this?
I think, like John said, listening skills is very important. Putting away our head of expertise and knowing what we want, and this is for the best of the community, but not telling that in a very respectful way. So I think the first one listening skills, networking skills, which most of us, okay, in my case, I had to learn because as a geologist or the geochemist, I'm just used to, paper and books and labs. And so really networking skills with people, that's very important. So yeah, I think listening skills and networking skills, those are, apart from the technical skills that we have, something that we should really try to enhance ourselves with.
Who else wants to jump in on this? Lingli, Rose, Manuel, feel free to jump in to sort of give us your ideas.
Yes, if you don't mind. I think the language, it's very important because different communities really speak different language, industry, a general public, even like you go to a school, like John said, in iCRAG, we do a lot of public engagement, outreach, and we do need to practice our activities before going to the school because the language we use, normally technical language, it doesn't work with the 30 years old kids. So I think find a common ground, speak a common language is very important.
Brilliant, brilliant. Any other speaker that would like to jump in on that before we move to another aspect of the discussion? Rose, do you have something to say? John, Manuel?
No, I think communication, listening, I think all of that is, I agree with everything that's been said, really. I think we have a tendency to, geologists especially like to have specific words for such specific things that even within our silos within geology, sometimes I don't understand a structural geologist. So taking a step back is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I think as scientists, we deal with quite deep subjects, technical subjects, and we have to develop the ability to communicate in a simple, engaging, emotional way. And I think if you look at people like David Attenborough, I mean, he deals with huge subjects, but he brings it down to a very simple level. Is it Cox? His name is Cox, the astrophysics. I mean, he's talking about quantum physics, and he's able to actually make us understand how far these stars are away. I mean, we have such fantastic things. Look at the time. They say you have to study geology to understand time. Maybe you understand study space or astrophysics to understand space, but it's an incredibly exciting thing we do. And we need to just be able to communicate. I've always found that generally people are really fascinated. They're fascinated with what we do. And we just have to harness that excitement and communicate simply and listen.
Brilliant, brilliant. Just one question before we sort of round up. I just have a question to sort of say, for us to really know that, or to say we are working in a sustainable environment, we need to touch on issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Do we think this is being practiced? Are we being equal? Are we being inclusive? And I'd really just like to hear one or two opinions, and then we can move on to sort of career advices and things like that. Who would want to take this question on equity, diversity, and inclusion? Is that being practiced at the moment? And if not, what do we have to do? I mean, we probably know what we need to do, but I would still like to hear opinions on what you personally think can be done. All right, Manuel, sorry to pick you, but what are your opinions?
I think nowadays the diversity, especially and inclusion in geoscience is not in the level that we would like, but it's better than before, as I can pick up. I have no much experience as a researcher or as exploration geologist, but as a student from the university I'm coming from, before I had that, you couldn't find more than 10 students, human students in geoscience class. But now the number is even. You can find 50-50, and it brings me to the conclusion that the things are getting better. Of course, not in the state that we would like to see, but I hope in the future the thing will be better. And this is one example we have here. this diverse team, including human, men, and that's really, really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. John, I'm going to pick your brain a bit for 30 seconds. What career advice do you have to the youngsters in the room listening to this panel discussion? 30 seconds. Short and sweet, please.
Okay, I thought you were going to ask me about the diversity and inclusion part of it. But look, I got into the geology through tectonics, like we were saying earlier on the speaker, and interest in structural geology, and then you follow your path. Well, you know, I suppose in those days you go into soft rock geology, oil and gas exploration, hard rock geology, mining. But you should get engaged with your local chapters. There's plenty of opportunities out there for mentoring and guidance in the IGI here in Ireland. We're also seeing that a change in our student membership too, increasing amount of females. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunity out there to engage. SEG is a wonderful organization, obviously through mentoring and student organizations, and learn your basics, learn your chemistry, learn your physics, and so on, and get your tools right, and then the world's your oyster. I think it's an incredibly exciting time, more so even than when I started my career. I mean, it's just a huge transformation. The world needs the metals. You got to get out there and you got to find them. So it's a fantastic time now to be where you are.
All right, thank you, Dad. Okay, just to round up the room, thanks for the great discussion. But before I let you guys go, I'd like to get sort of around the room to sort of say, what are your individual views on, so what are your visions for the future? And so more like, what would you like to see within the larger economic geology community? So that just to sort of round out the room, what are your visions of the future and what would you like to see within the larger economic geology community? I'd like to start with Rose.
I think my ideal future would be, I think based on what we spoke about, when you bring a diverse group of people to the table, you naturally can address issues better because you have more diverse thought and you have more diverse opinions, and you start to realise, what's important to different people. And I think going forward, it'd be really great to see diversity increase within geology, to see numbers of students rising again. And that, I think, will naturally make geology a more sustainable place as we start engaging more people.
Brilliant, brilliant. Lingli, over to you.
Yes, I think it's a very good wrap up from when we started the sustainable development and to combining with economic geology. So economic geology really touched many aspects, geology, economics, and of course you can't avoid talking about the social and environmental impact. So how to achieve a sustainable development in economic geology? I think it really needs cooperations of all the sectors that are involved in the development. So that's what I would like to see in the future.
And I'm sure everyone agrees with you, collaboration. Josephine, over to you.
I totally agree with Lingli. Collaboration for me is one of the things that I would like to see, open to possibility with working with other scientists, trying to find scientific solution for a better future for our future generation. So I think in a nutshell, collaboration, communication, and engagement with everybody.
Brilliant. Manuel, over to you. And John, you'll be the last one to give us your vision for the future.
Yes, I wouldn't be so apart from what Josephine and Lingli said. Collaboration of young scientists and scholars across disciplines and boundaries is of the utmost importance to achieve, for instance, sustainable development. But other things that I would like also to see within our community is a growing interest to learn how to effectively communicate issues related to our discipline to non-experts. And that's what we discussed here. So I think those are the things that I would like to see. Thank you.
John, over to you.
Yes, I guess career sustainability actually for economic geologists. We see an older cohort and a younger cohort, and then we've got a big gap in the middle. Now that is often a response to the mining and exploration response to metal prices and cycles in the economic cycles. And geologists lose their jobs in downturns, whereas that's not necessarily the case with other careers as much. So we need to have it more sustainable as a career, and I think that the governments have a larger role to play in that. It's going to require longer term planning and not just knee-jerk responses to the copper price going up and then the copper price going down, and then you close projects and you fire young geologists. So that's a major problem that we have, and we lose all that experience as we go through. Then people go off and they go into other industries and so on. So yes, I would like to see more sustainable careers being developed for geologists, and how that's going to be done. As I said, more longer term planning and maybe more government involvement.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you guys for your time and for an exciting discussion. But as a young geoscientist, I would also just like to, I'm not part of the panel discussion, I'm not a panelist, but I also like to sort of share my vision for the future. And I just want to touch on communication is really key, data access is really key, government, like John said, I think everything really boils down to what the government have in places. And we are in the great positions as young geoscientists to make sure that we contribute to making sure that our governments understand the value of what we have in our countries, and only then they can make rules and policies that favor both the investors and us as local people. And then the other thing, again, networking is really key. And it's also only through networking that we are able to sort of do this collaboration. Okay, and then overall, enjoy geology, and if you put all these aspects, I'm sure we can achieve sustainable development. Once again, thank you for your time, and thanks for the interesting discussion that we just had.